My parents spent all their savings on my sister's serious illness for years and called me heartless whenever I questioned it. When the house was close to foreclosure, they asked me for money. I had what most would call a successful life. Good job, nice apartment, and friends who actually care about me. But my relationship with my family has been complicated for as long as I can remember. Mostly because of my younger sister, Melissa. Growing up, Melissa was always sick. From the time she was about 9 years old, she complained about mysterious pains, fatigue, dizziness, and a host of other symptoms that would come and go without explanation. My parents, especially my mother, devoted their entire lives to taking care of her. They spent countless hours in doctors' offices, emergency rooms, and specialist clinics trying to find a diagnosis that would explain what was happening to their precious daughter. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself. Need help with homework? Mom's taking Melissa to another appointment. Want to go to your basketball game? Dad can't drive you because Melissa isn't feeling well. My achievements and problems alike were footnotes in the family story, always overshadowed by whatever new symptom or medical crisis Melissa was experiencing. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister. If she had actually been sick, I would have understood. But even as a child, I noticed things that didn't add up. Melissa's symptoms would mysteriously disappear when something fun was happening, only to return with a vengeance when she had chores or responsibilities. The way she'd dramatically collapse after the slightest exertion, but somehow find the energy to scroll through social media for hours. Whenever I tried to point out these inconsistencies to my parents, I was branded as insensitive, jealous, and downright cruel. How dare you question your sister's suffering, my mother would say. You should be thankful you're healthy instead of resenting her. By the time I left for college, my parents had drained their savings, remortgaged the house twice, and even borrowed money from relatives, all to fund Melissa's never-ending medical journey. They were seeing specialists whose credentials seemed questionable at best, trying experimental treatments not covered by insurance, and buying all sorts of equipment and supplements that promised relief, but delivered nothing. I distanced myself during those years, focusing on building my own life. Annual holiday visits were enough to maintain the bare minimum of family connection while preserving my sanity. But even those brief encounters were filled with tension. Every conversation eventually circled back to Melissa's health, my parents' financial struggles due to her medical bills, and subtle or not so subtle hints that I should be contributing more to her care. The situation came to a head last year when my father called me in tears. They were facing foreclosure on their home. The equity was gone, their credit cards were maxed out, and they had no retirement savings left. He asked if I could loan them $50,000 to help catch up on the mortgage and pay for Melissa's latest treatment, some kind of stem cell therapy in another state that wasn't covered by insurance but promised miraculous results. That's when I realized something had to change. Not just for my parents' financial future, but for Melissa too. Whatever was happening this cycle wasn't helping anyone. But before I committed that kind of money, I needed to understand exactly what was going on. Dad, I said I want to help, but I need to see Melissa's medical records first. I want to understand what treatment she's had, what diagnoses have been confirmed, and what this new therapy is supposed to address. His response was immediate and angry. You've never believed she was sick. Now you want to inspect her private medical information. Your mother and I have spent 20 years fighting for your sister while you've been off living your life, and this is how you respond when we need you. The conversation ended with him hanging up on me. Within hours, I was bombarded with text messages from my mother and Melissa herself, accusing me of being heartless and abandoning the family in their time of need. Instead of backing down, I decided it was time to dig deeper. If I was going to help my family, I needed to understand what was really happening, not just what I was being told. I flew home the following weekend, determined to get to the bottom of 20 years of medical mysteries. What I discovered would change our family forever. Update. When I arrived at my parents' home that weekend, the tension was palpable. My mother barely acknowledged me, busying herself with arranging Melissa's pillows and checking if she needed anything. My father gave me a stiff hug but wouldn't meet my eyes. Melissa, meanwhile, was stretched out on the living room couch, her command center surrounded by medication bottles, a laptop, and her phone. Hi, Jennifer, she said weakly. I didn't think you'd actually come. I'm here because I'm concerned about everyone. I replied, keeping my voice even. About the medical treatments, about Mom and Dad's finances, about you. She rolled her eyes. Here we go again? You've never believed me. That's not true, I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely false either, but I do think it's reasonable to want to understand what's happening before I contribute such a large sum of money. My mother entered the room, hearing the tail end of our conversation. Jennifer, your sister doesn't need to justify her illness to you. The doctors have confirmed. Which doctors? I interrupted. What exactly have they confirmed? I'd like to see her medical records, talk to her current physicians, understand the treatment plan. That's all I'm asking. We don't have time for this, my father said, his voice strained. The mortgage payment is already late, and the treatment center needs a deposit by next week. I took a deep breath. I'm staying for 3 days. That gives us plenty of time to go through everything. If what you're saying checks out, I'll help, but I need to see the documentation first. What followed was a calculated dance of avoidance. My mother suddenly remembered appointments and errands. My father claimed the medical files were somewhere in storage. Melissa developed a migraine that required complete darkness and silence, making any discussion impossible. By the second day, I realized I wasn't going to get anywhere with their cooperation. So, while everyone was occupied, my parents at the pharmacy picking up yet another prescription, and Melissa napping upstairs, I began searching the house. In my father's home office, I found a filing cabinet filled with medical bills, insurance statements, and correspondence. The sheer volume was overwhelming. I started taking photos of everything, creating a digital record I could review more carefully later. That's when I noticed something odd. While there were countless bills for consultations, tests, and treatments, many of them had notes from insurance companies declining coverage due to insufficient medical evidence or experimental or unproven treatments. The few actual medical reports I found were vague, with phrases like patient reports, symptoms consistent with, rather than definitive diagnosis. I also discovered bank statements showing withdrawals to practitioners with dubious credentials, holistic wellness centers, energy healers, and medical intuitive consultants. There were receipts for supplements costing hundreds of dollars per month and specialized equipment that promised to eliminate environmental toxins. The most concerning find, however, was a folder labeled Melissa Hospital Records. Inside were discharge summaries from several emergency room visits. I scanned through them quickly, and a pattern emerged. Each visit described the same scenario. Melissa arriving with dramatic symptoms, extensive testing, revealing no abnormalities, and a discharge diagnosis of nonspecific symptoms, possible anxiety. I was still processing this information when I heard the garage door open. I quickly replaced the files and slipped out of the office. That evening, I tried a different approach. Instead of demanding answers, I sat with Melissa while our parents were watching television in another room. I asked her genuinely and without judgment how she was feeling. To my surprise, she opened up not about her illness, but about her life. How she'd never finished college or held a job. How her social circle had shrunk to online support groups for chronic illness. How she sometimes wondered what her life might have been like if things had been different. For a moment, I saw vulnerability in her eyes, a glimpse of the sister I remembered from childhood. But when I gently suggested that perhaps some of her symptoms might be connected to anxiety or depression, her walls went back up immediately. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" she snapped. "You always think you know better than everyone else." Our conversation ended there, but I'd seen enough to know my suspicions were likely correct. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed more conclusive evidence, and I knew where to find it. Using my emergency key to my parents' house, I returned the following week while everyone was at yet another doctor's appointment. This time, I had a specific target, Melissa's laptop. It wasn't the most ethical approach, but I was convinced the situation had become desperate enough to justify it. What I found in her browser history and email account confirmed everything I had suspected, and worse. Update 2. Melissa's laptop revealed a troubling truth I had long suspected but couldn't prove. In her browser history, I found dozens of searches for symptoms to mimic guides on how to fake medical tests and membership in online forums dedicated to something called factitious disorder, a condition where people deliberately fake illness for attention and care. Her emails contained correspondence with others who shared tips on which doctors were easy to convince, which symptoms were hardest to disprove, and how to manipulate family members who expressed doubt. She had even ordered devices designed to create false readings on certain medical tests. Most disturbing of all were her private social media accounts, ones my parents didn't know about, where she posted photos of herself at parties and events on the same days she claimed to be bedridden. In these hidden profiles, she appeared vibrant and healthy, laughing with friends who seemed to have no idea about her supposed disabilities. I methodically documented everything, taking screenshots and saving emails to a secure cloud folder. I wasn't yet sure how I would use this information, but I knew I needed irrefutable evidence before confronting my family. With this new knowledge, I consulted 2 professionals, a medical doctor specializing in psychosomatic disorders, and a financial advisor with experience in family financial crisis. The doctor confirmed that Melissa's pattern aligned with what's sometimes called Munchausen syndrome, where someone deliberately produces or exaggerates illness for psychological reasons. The financial advisor painted a bleak picture of my parents' situation. They were much closer to bankruptcy than even they realized. Armed with expert advice and evidence, I developed a strategy. Direct confrontation would only cause everyone to become defensive. Instead, I needed to create a situation where the truth would become undeniable. I drafted a detailed letter to my parents explaining that I would help them with their financial situation on one condition. Melissa needed to undergo a comprehensive evaluation at a specific medical center known for its expertise in diagnosing complex cases. I would pay for this evaluation directly. No money would go through Melissa or my parents. "This is a chance to get a definitive diagnosis from top specialists," I wrote. "If they confirm Melissa's conditions, I'll not only help with the current financial crisis, but set up a fund for her ongoing care. All I ask is that everyone cooperate fully with the evaluation process." I chose my words carefully, presenting the offer as a genuine attempt to help rather than a challenge. By framing it this way, refusing would be difficult to justify. If Melissa truly believed she was ill, why would she object to seeing top specialists? If my parents truly wanted the best care for her, why would they decline? When I called to discuss the letter, my mother was immediately suspicious. "Why can't you just help us without all these conditions? We've been managing Melissa's care for years." I'm not questioning your care, Mom, I replied calmly. I'm offering a resource you haven't had access to before. Comprehensive testing at a center that specializes in difficult-to-diagnose conditions. Don't you want to know if there's something that's been missed all this time? My father, always more practical, saw the financial lifeline I was offering. It's a reasonable request, Linda, he told my mother. If Jennifer's willing to pay for specialized care, we should accept. Melissa's reaction was the most revealing. When told about the arrangement, she immediately began listing reasons why she couldn't possibly travel to the medical center. It was too far. The environmental triggers there would make her worse. She had researched the center before and knew they wouldn't help her. When these excuses didn't work, she had one of her most severe episodes in months, conveniently making any travel impossible. I had anticipated this reaction. That's okay, I told my parents. I've spoken with the center, and they can send a mobile assessment team for the initial evaluation. They specialize in patients too ill to travel. Backed into a corner, Melissa finally agreed, likely believing she could manipulate these doctors as she had others. The evaluation was scheduled for the following week. What happened next exceeded even my expectations. The assessment team wasn't just thorough. They were familiar with factitious disorder and knew exactly what to look for. They conducted tests that couldn't be faked, monitored. Melissa, when she didn't know she was being observed, and reviewed her entire medical history with fresh eyes. 3 days later, the lead physician requested a family meeting. With clinical precision, he explained that they had found no medical evidence to support any of Melissa's claimed physical conditions. Instead, the psychological evaluation strongly suggested factitious disorder. In simpler terms, he said, looking directly at my stunned parents, Melissa has been creating or exaggerating symptoms for psychological reasons. This is a real psychiatric condition that requires different treatment than what you've been pursuing. My mother began to protest, but the doctor gently cut her off. We've documented inconsistencies that cannot be explained by any physical illness. For example, Melissa's claimed paralysis disappeared completely when she believed she wasn't being observed. Blood tests show no abnormalities despite reported symptoms that would definitely appear in laboratory results if genuine. The final blow came when he placed a folder on the table. We've also received these records from Melissa's primary care physician, showing that she's been told repeatedly over the years that her tests were normal and that her symptoms were likely psychological in nature. This was new information even to me. Apparently, Melissa had been selectively sharing information with my parents, showing them only the vague or inconclusive reports while hiding the documents that contradicted her narrative. My parents sat in shocked silence. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in an instant. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the folder. Melissa, for her part, stormed out of the room screaming that everyone was against her. The doctor turned to my parents. This is going to be difficult for everyone, but understanding what's really happening is the first step toward healing for Melissa and for your family. As the meeting concluded, I felt no satisfaction in being proven right, only sadness for 20 years of deception and cautious hope that maybe now healing could begin. Update 3. The aftermath of the medical team's assessment was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. My parents went through distinct stages of grief denial, anger bargaining, before beginning to accept the reality of the situation. My mother initially refused to believe the doctor's conclusions. They just didn't run the right tests, she insisted. All these years, all these symptoms, they can't all be made up. She called several of Melissa's previous doctors, hoping they would contradict the assessment team's findings. Most wouldn't speak with her at all, citing patient confidentiality, but a few actually confirmed what the assessment had revealed. They had found no medical evidence of disease despite extensive testing. My father processed things differently. After the initial shock wore off, he retreated into his home office with years of financial records, calculating just how much they had spent on Melissa's non-existent conditions. The total, over $600,000, not covered by insurance, sent him into a deep depression. Our retirement gone. The home equity gone. Even loans from your aunt and uncle. All for nothing. Meanwhile, Melissa's reaction was a textbook case of being caught in a long-term deception. She cycled through various tactics to regain control of the narrative. First came righteous indignation. How dare we question her suffering after all these years? When that didn't work, she tried creating new different symptoms that proved the doctors were wrong. When even my mother began questioning these convenient new developments, Melissa switched to playing the victim, claiming we were abandoning her when she needed us most. Through all of this, I maintained a steady approach. I arranged for Melissa to see a psychiatrist specializing in factitious disorder, though she refused to attend the first 3 appointments. I helped my parents connect with a financial advisor to address their precarious situation. And I carefully documented everything that happened, knowing that backsliding was common in these cases. About 3 weeks after the assessment, I received a call from my mother, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. Jennifer, she said, I found something. She explained that she had been going through Melissa's room, something she would never have done before, and discovered a box hidden in the back of her closet. Inside were normal medical reports that Melissa had kept from them, journals detailing how she planned and executed her deceptions, and even materials she used to fake certain symptoms. All these years, my mother's voice broke. I don't know how to process this. How did we not see it? It was the first time my mother had ever asked for my perspective instead of dismissing it. I chose my words carefully. You saw what you expected to see, Mom. You and Dad loved Melissa and wanted to protect her. She exploited that love. Over the next few days, my parents confronted Melissa with the evidence they'd found. The conversation was painful for everyone. Melissa initially denied everything, then claimed she had actually been sick at the beginning and only started faking symptoms when the real ones disappeared, afraid to lose the care and attention she'd grown accustomed to. It was my father who finally laid down the law. This stops now, he told her firmly. We've lost our retirement and nearly our home because of this manipulation. You have two choices. Get professional help for this disorder and start building a real life, or move out and support yourself. Melissa's shock was genuine. In 20 years, my father had never spoken to her that way. She had never faced real consequences for her actions. For the first time, the gravity of what she had done seemed to hit her. The path forward wasn't easy. We found a residential treatment program specializing in factitious disorder. My parents couldn't afford it, so I agreed to pay with strict conditions. Melissa would complete the full program. She would allow her therapist to share general progress updates with the family. And most importantly, she would begin taking responsibility for rebuilding her life and the relationships she had damaged. My parents too agreed to family therapy to address the enabling patterns they had developed. The therapist helped them see how their well-intentioned protection had actually prevented Melissa from developing healthy coping mechanisms and life skills. You're not responsible for her deception, the therapist told them, but your response to it created an environment where it could flourish. As for the financial situation, I worked with my parents and their financial advisor to develop a sustainable plan. I helped them refinance their mortgage at a better rate and paid off their most pressing debts. The rest would take time, but with careful budgeting and my father delaying retirement by a few years, they could recover. I also insisted they reach out to the relatives they'd borrowed from over the years. They deserved to know what their money was actually used for, I said. My parents dreaded these conversations, but afterward my father admitted they had gone better than expected. Your aunt just said she was glad we finally knew the truth. She'd had suspicions for years, but didn't want to hurt us by saying anything. 3 months into treatment, Melissa's therapist reported she was making slow but real progress. The protective shell of her false identity was cracking, revealing the insecure person underneath who had never learned healthy ways to meet her emotional needs. There would be a long road ahead, but for the first time in decades, she was facing reality. During a family therapy session, Melissa finally answered the question we'd all been wondering. Why did she start faking illness in the first place? I was 9, she said quietly. Jennifer was winning awards at school, and everyone was paying attention to her. I got sick with a real flu, and suddenly Mom was bringing me soup and Dad was reading me stories. I got better, but I didn't want to lose that feeling, so I pretended it never went away, and then it just snowballed. It wasn't a justification, but it was an explanation. One that helped us all begin to understand how a childhood bid for attention had evolved into a life-consuming deception. As the months passed, our family dynamic began to shift into something healthier, though the process was neither quick nor easy. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, but underneath it all was a fundamental change. We were finally dealing with reality instead of an elaborate fiction. Update 4. 6 months into Melissa's treatment program, the changes in our family were becoming more pronounced. My parents had begun the difficult process of rebuilding their lives both financially and emotionally. They'd sold their large house, the one they could never really afford, and downsized to a comfortable condo that better suited their needs and budget. The transition wasn't easy, but my father seemed relieved to no longer be drowning in mortgage payments he couldn't make. My mother struggled more with the adjustment. For 2 decades, her entire identity had revolved around being the devoted mother of a chronically ill child. She had sacrificed her career, her friendships, and her own interests to care for Melissa. Now faced with the truth, she had to confront a painful question. Who was she without that role? I don't know what to do with myself, she admitted during one of our now regular coffee meetings. I used to spend hours researching treatments, driving to appointments, arguing with insurance companies. Now, I just exist. I suggested she consider therapy for herself, separate from the family sessions we all attended. You've been through a traumatic experience too, Mom. Finding out that a central part of your life for 20 years wasn't real. That's its own kind of loss. Surprisingly, she agreed. The therapist helped her work through her complicated feelings, grief for the years lost, guilt over her role in enabling Melissa, anger at being deceived, and fear about rebuilding her life at this stage. Slowly, she began rediscovering interests she'd abandoned long ago. She joined a book club, took a part-time job at a local nursery. She'd always loved gardening, and even reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with. My father found his own way forward. After the initial shock and depression subsided, he seemed almost energized by having a clear financial problem to solve. He was good with numbers and planning skills that had been overwhelmed by the chaos of Melissa's ever-changing medical crisis. Now he could apply that talent to rebuilding their financial stability. He worked with the financial advisor I'd connected them with, creating a strict budget and debt repayment plan. He even started a small consulting business to supplement his income as he approached retirement age. As for Melissa, her progress in treatment was steady but challenging. According to her therapists, cases of factitious disorder as severe and long-lasting as hers often took years of intensive work to address. The deeply ingrained patterns of deception, attention-seeking, and manipulation couldn't be undone in a few months. But there were promising signs. She had finally acknowledged her deception without qualifications or excuses, a critical first step. She had begun identifying the emotional triggers that prompted her to fake or exaggerate symptoms, and she was learning healthier ways to meet her need for care and attention. 4 months into the program, her primary therapist recommended she begin writing letters of amends to family members she had hurt. These wouldn't be delivered immediately. They were part of her therapeutic process, but they represented an important step in taking responsibility. When Melissa was finally ready, she asked to meet with me privately. I agreed, though, with some trepidation. Our relationship had been so distorted for so long that I wasn't sure what to expect. We met at a quiet cafe near the treatment center. She looked different, more grounded, less theatrical in her movements and expressions. The constant performance of illness had faded. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice lacking the fragile quality she'd cultivated for so many years. "And thank you for exposing the truth. I know that sounds strange, but I was trapped in a prison of my own making, and I didn't know how to get out." She handed me an envelope. "My therapist suggested I write this, but the decision to read it is yours. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away." I took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. "Why did you keep going?" I asked. "All those years, all those fake symptoms, didn't it exhaust you?" She nodded slowly. "It was exhausting, but the attention, the care, the feeling of being special, that was addictive. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to stop. How could I suddenly be well after everyone had sacrificed so much? What would happen to me? Who would I even be?" "You could have been yourself," I said quietly. "I didn't know who that was anymore," she replied. "The real Melissa got lost somewhere along the way." Later, alone in my hotel room, I opened her letter. It was 10 pages of handwritten text, a detailed accounting of her deceptions, the damage she knew she had caused, and her genuine remorse. There were no excuses, no attempts to minimize what she had done, just a raw acknowledgement of the truth, and an understanding that forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be earned over time, not granted immediately. I won't pretend I forgave her in that moment. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too profound. But I did recognize the courage it took to face what she had done, and I saw the first real signs of the sister I had lost long ago. The road ahead would still be long and uncertain. Melissa would need to complete her treatment program, learn to build a life based on reality rather than deception, and find her place in a world where she was just an ordinary person, not the center of a medical drama. My parents would continue rebuilding their finances and processing their complicated feelings about the past 20 years, and I would have to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with my family moving forward. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, we were all moving in the same direction toward honesty, accountability, and healing. Update 5. 1 year after the truth about Melissa's deception came to light, our family gathered for a small celebration, not of her illness as we had done countless times in the past, but of her completion of the residential treatment program. It was a subdued affair, nothing like the dramatic events that had centered around her before. Just dinner at my parents' condo with cake afterward. Melissa had made significant progress. She had been symptom-free for 6 months, meaning she hadn't faked or exaggerated any medical conditions during that time. She had developed healthier coping mechanisms for when she felt the urge to slip back into old patterns. And she had begun rebuilding her life from the ground up, taking online courses, to finally complete her long-abandoned college degree, volunteering at an animal shelter for structured social interaction, and living independently in a small apartment near my parents. The changes in her were remarkable. Gone was the frail, dramatic persona she had cultivated for so long. Her voice had lost its breathless quality. Her posture was stronger, and she made eye contact in a way she never had before. Most significantly, she no longer dominated every conversation with detailed accounts of her suffering. "I'm nervous about the job interview next week," she told me as we helped clear the dinner plates. "It's been so long since I've worked. I'm not sure I remember how to be normal." "Normal is overrated," I replied, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. "Just be honest. That's what matters." My parents, too, had transformed. My father looked years younger now that the crushing financial burden had begun to lift. He wasn't free of debt yet, but with his consulting work and careful budgeting, he could see a path forward. My mother had found a new sense of purpose volunteering at a crisis center, using her experience to help other families navigate difficult situations. The codependent relationship she'd had with Melissa had evolved into something healthier for both of them. The family therapy we had all participated in had helped us develop new communication patterns. We were learning to speak directly instead of through hints and manipulation, to set boundaries without guilt, and to acknowledge uncomfortable truths instead of maintaining polite fictions. That evening after dessert, Melissa asked if she could say something to everyone. She stood nervously holding a piece of paper that trembled slightly in her hand. "I've been working on this with my therapist," she began. "It's hard to find the right words for something that's hurt so many people for so long, but I need to say this to all of you together." She took a deep breath and continued. I am fully responsible for the deception I maintained for most of my life. I manipulated everyone in this room to get the care and attention I craved without regard for the damage I was causing. I can't undo the lost years, the financial hardship, or the emotional pain I've created. All I can do is commit to living honestly from now on and trying day by day to rebuild the trust I've broken. She turned to me specifically. Jennifer, you had the courage to seek the truth when everyone else was content with a lie even though you knew you'd be vilified for it. I resented you for that for a long time, but now I understand it was the most caring thing anyone has ever done for me. Thank you for not giving up on the real me, even when I had. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. It wasn't a magical moment that erased all the hurt of the past, but it was a milestone in our healing process. Later that night, as I was leaving, my father walked me to my car. I need to say something to you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. When you were growing up, I failed you. I was so focused on Melissa that I didn't see what was happening, how you were being pushed aside, how your achievements went unacknowledged, how you had to fend for yourself. I didn't protect you the way a father should. I started to brush it off, my default response to any acknowledgement of the family's dysfunction. But he stopped me. No, please let me finish. This is important. You deserved better than what you got from us. And despite that, you grew into an incredible person. Strong, successful, ethical. That's all you, Jennifer. You did that without our help. And I'm so proud of you for it. I just wish I'd been the kind of father who contributed to that strength instead of someone you had to be strong in spite of. His words unlocked something in me, a validation I hadn't realized I was still seeking. All those years of being the forgotten child, the one who didn't need attention because I was handling things on my own, I had told myself it didn't matter anymore. But hearing my father acknowledge it without excuses or qualifications meant more than I could express. The healing process wasn't linear, and there were still challenging days ahead. Melissa had occasional setbacks where the temptation to slip back into her illness identity became overwhelming. My parents sometimes struggled with guilt so powerful it threatened to derail their progress, and I had moments where old resentment surfaced, making it difficult to believe in the family's transformation. But we kept moving forward. Melissa secured a part-time job and continued her education. My parents paid off the smaller debts and restructured the larger ones. I maintained boundaries while gradually rebuilding relationships with each of them individually. 2 years after the initial confrontation, my mother called me with news that felt like the closing of a circle. She and my father had finally paid back my aunt and uncle, the relatives who had loaned them money years ago for one of Melissa's treatments. We invited them over for dinner to give them the final check, she told me. Your aunt hugged me and said she was proud of us for how we've handled everything. Can you believe that, proud of us? There was wonder in her voice, and I understood why. After decades of shame, secrecy, and deception, my family was finally living in the light of truth. It wasn't always comfortable, and the consequences of the past would echo for years to come. But there was a fundamental integrity to our lives now that had been missing before. As for me, I no longer felt like the outsider in my own family. The very qualities that had once made me the odd one out, my pragmatism, my insistence on facts over emotions, my unwillingness to participate in collective denial, were now recognized as strengths. Not just by my family, but by myself as well. The story of Melissa's fake illnesses would always be part of our family history, but it no longer defined us. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a painful but necessary transformation, one that allowed all of us finally to begin healing.